Production funding for the Hmong and the Secret War is provided by
Wells Fargo is proud to support this important documentary, The Hmong and the Secret War. As a first-generation Hmong American, I am honored to represent a company that celebrates and embraces America's rich diversity. Watch
The Fresno County Superintendent of Schools is proud to be a longtime supporter of the quality educational programs found on Valley PBS. We continue to work together to honor and enhance understanding of the rich tapestry of cultures and communities found in our region.
Established in 1946, the Clovis Veterans Memorial District honors our Valley heroes, dedicated to the memory of all who proudly served, continue to serve, and protect the country. The district provides a permanent living memorial to the United States military and veterans.
additional production funding provided by and by viewers like you. Thank you.
There is a man who lives in the north. He lives in Laos. An American pilot found out where he was and told Lair. The largest helicopter anybody had ever seen, 50 feet long. And so they met. Lair was very tactful. He asked a question, "What are you going to do?" And Vang Pao launched in a soliloquy. Vang Pao not only wanted to protect his own country, not only wanted to help his people, but he was ambitious himself. It was extremely important for Lair, who was a very subtle operative, to find out what the other side had wanted. He wanted it to come from Vang Pao. He would have the Hmong as the tactical field commander, the guy who would call the shots in the field. The supporters would be the Thais and the Americans. And he and Lair remembered it almost exactly the same word for word 50 years later. These are our hills. These are our mountains. However, the enemy has come. If you give us arms, we will fight them. If not, we will flee.
Northern Laos has been home to the Hmong for 2 centuries by this time. And all of them believe that that's their homeland, that's their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, their ancestors had lived there, harvest that land, died there, buried there, and they felt that's their home and they needed to retake. By this time, the CIA's very interest is to deter communist aggression in Southeast Asia. Bill Lair was sent to Southeast Asia specifically to fight guerrilla warfare by the CIA. And he went in and he got the trust from the Thai, and he incorporated the Paru program, training these men into special forces.
It was Lair's original plan not to have any white Americans at all. He wanted the Paru to work with VP. They just blended right in. Nobody could tell that they were there. They became the instructors and the advisors.
Desmond Fitzgerald sent an 18-page cable back to Washington to the CIA headquarters. And shortly after that, it got approved to arm 1,000 men. And that's how Operation Momentum came about.
The Americans had all these surplus arms. They were surplus from World War II. They were already in crates. Pathet Lao communists saw those first supply parachutes dropping and came in.
And they conducted a 3-day training program for the Hmong to harass and intercept Congolese troops and the communist troops.
The Hmong were set up for ambushes. The Paru were there, but the Paru were not holding weapons themselves. They were advising. They wanted the Hmong to do the shooting from the very start. They wanted Vang Pao completely in charge from the very start. The ambush went off without a hitch. They killed all the enemy soldiers. There was a lot of rejoicing. There were Hmong who jumped for joy. There were Hmong who were not involved in the fighting who pleaded for a rifle. And Lair arrived in a small plane in the midst of all this rejoicing. And that's how the secret army started. Vang Pao asserted that he could raise a guerrilla force of 10,000 tribesmen. The CIA said, okay, start small. The Hmong already had 12 resistance centers set up around the Plain of Jars. This came from previous stages of war they'd had with the French, so the Hmong were really, really prepared. So it went from the first 1,000 in about a month, and then 4,000, 6,000, up till 10,000, and then quickly mushroomed past that. Vang Pao was ambitious. He was a man of great ability. He did not want to be a guerrilla commander. He wanted airplanes, he wanted artillery, he wanted tanks, he wanted to fight a conventional war. Once Vang Pao got a hold of conventional weapons and air power, he would want to fight the Vietnamese head-on, the most capable army in all of Asia at that time. The Hmong in Laos at that point had only 250,000, and the North Vietnamese had 19 million. So Lair always wanted it to be a guerrilla war, and Vang Pao always wanted to go big. The more the Americans spent, the less successful the war effort was. A decision was made to place a radar apparatus on a mountaintop called Pupati that could be used for helping American warplanes navigate even through cloudy, rainy weather to Hanoi to drop the bombs that were supposed to win the war.
North Vietnam feels the threat, feels the pain, and they send in a large number of troops into Laos to take this site out. At the same time, south of Pupati was Naka, Site 36. The United States utilized Site 36 as a rescue base to rescue down American pilots. The Hmong played a significant role in that.
It was very obvious from the reconnaissance planes that the North Vietnamese were determined to reach this mountain and to capture the mountain peak, rather than serve as a strategic advantage to the U.S. side to have that facility on the mountain top. It turned inside out. It turned into a target. At the beginning of the war, it was very simple. The Hmong were protecting their own lands. To protect somebody else's lands involves a layer of an abstraction that many were not quite ready for. The war was like a kaleidoscope where the tubes were twisted and the picture changed completely. People in Washington started thinking that instead of the Hmong having an operation to defend their own territory, they really should help out the operation in South Vietnam.
To different people, the war was about different things.
It would endanger the security of all and the peace of all of Southeast Asia.
To the proponents of the war, it was about stopping the march of communism across Southeast Asia. There was something called the Domino Theory.
All we want in Laos is peace, a truly neutral government, not a Cold War pawn.
The opponents of the war saw it as the U.S. meddling in what was essentially a civil war in that region.
There are no American combat forces in Laos.
There were stories about the secret war in Laos, but not a lot of coverage. The main show was in Vietnam.
There was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of running, there was a lot of shooting, and there was a lot of dying. And I never learned the name of more than one or two airplane pilots because they had quite a high mortality rate. We had two groups that we flew in, primarily Air America, and the other was known as Continental Airlines, and they worked for the boys next door. We delivered rice for the 2 years that I worked with POP, helping people go to a new area and get started in a new life. There was quite a lot of attrition among the Hmong soldiers. It got so bad that at one time General Vang Pao had to send out the order that all students, male, up to the age of 11 were exempt from going in the Army. But if you were 11 years old, you were drafted and you ended up in the Hmong Army. I went out to the airstrip one day and saw a group of soldiers around a body. It was a very small body. Talked to a little boy next to it. He was 12 years old, and he was dressed in a uniform that was about 3 times too big. He was Hmong, but he knew Lao. And he said, "That is my friend, Li Gao. He and I both joined the Army a year ago when he was 10 and I was 11. And he was killed this week, and I am flying back with his body to the village that he came with." His rifle accompanied him, a small carbine suitable for that of a boy. The larger rifles went to taller, more grown-up men. But a helicopter or a plane picked up the body, and they picked up the gun, flew them back to the village. He was buried, and his carbine was then handed to the next boy that took his place in the Hmong Army.
At school next to the airport, one of my friends, her name's Julie, so we would just grab into the airplane, away from the family to a nurse training. Why am I doing this and no other? Why other girls, they can be with a parent but not me? Until you see all the wounded soldier, until you see all the sick patient, until you see all these patients who are critical in an ICU, you will be taught that you have to help your people. And you should not be scared. And you will be with other nurses too, and they will be there for you. It doesn't matter how old or how young you are. They will treat all the nurses at the same level, and they will make sure that you treat just like everyone else over there.
Thầu wartime đó mà tôi planning mà thầu lu giờ cho tôi mới cho bông bị bông cho tôi nào không mỏi chị yêu cho housekeeping cho tôi này cho chính này nữa nè bố chân trai bố chỉ có đó ta chỉ cũng mà có chân trai giờ cũng có chủ một sai nên chơi mùa giờ cũng có chủ ta có sao chờ bé mà thấy khé có ta kia bé mà mỗi nhau hồng xa có một đứa có lúc family có sao phụ có lúc family nữa như hai dùng đó nữa because bố to rồi ta chỉ bố tụ pli nè bố tụ pli bao chị hiểu chủ ta cũng tụi mình chỉ giống lại có sao chờ nữa mà nó chị có thâu có một chế sữa có sao chờ nữa nè cũng mua luôn nè I don't know the tear come out nè chị cũng muốn soi của ta sắp cô cái giờ mình chỉ có một bụng nhiều sẽ sai nữa nè.
It was determined that Long Cheng would be the ideal place for the Cold War, so that it's easy to protect and defend, and that it's remote so nobody would know where it is. When that radio station was set up in Thailand, they could broadcast, and Vang Pao also distributed radios to the village chiefs from different regions so that they can listen to the broadcast. So that's a way how Vang Pao could get his influence in and educate the remote communities about communism versus democracy. That's how he was able to get more and more of the minority groups to join him. Where there's no discrimination, he encouraged pageant contests with a very diverse pageant contests from different ethnic minority groups.
It wasn't just about fighting, it was about helping the Hmong progress. And that is part of the reason that Vang Pao was able to get so much support from the Hmong. So this wholesale transformation started as a result of the war.
The war itself opened up the opportunities for the Hmong. Those that are able to go and study will go. Where a human was raised and all he knows is working on the field and became a legendary pilot. Where a young man was raised in the mountain and were able to guide U.S. bombers, the Air Force, to go in and bomb enemy targets. If the Hmong was given the opportunity, the Hmong can learn to be anything. So while he was fighting the war, all of those soldiers that have at least some kind of education that can read and write, Vang Pao assigned those to be teachers. That's how much a man sacrificed and strategized to move his people, at the same time defend his people.
Over the objections of many who did not think the Hmong had the ability to fly combat planes, the U.S. Air Force set up a program called Water Pump to teach South Vietnamese and Laotian pilots to fly.
Cho mua lì lử bây giờ lâu tờ nó mà nhà ta hàn lâu họ á mù gì nên tia lì đờ này thế bên nó thế lử ya cái kỳ thế kinh chỉ là kinh tôi từ bỏ lên ya tao nhau số tôi bỏ tao lúng bom là gì của thế kinh ta là của chỉ vui xanhแต่สิlử mà nghĩa ít tôi ta hàn lâu nữa bỏ thế lúc cứ hàn nó tôi đê nó khăn nó lúc nhỏ mới nhỏ bỏ to đi nó chỉ nên ya tao nè ta hàn lâu họ á nó nên tới giờ bây giờ tôi không bỏ cho không nhỏ nhau tên nên gì mà thọ tao trâu lúng bom capacity nữa lúc thong thanh tra mà cho tao bê số mông là bê số mông này ngầu ya liên đó mà một chi tua mà ya chủ xua cơn ngầu ya alu ấy xí ba cho một ilu rồi ta chỉ bê cho mông mà nhiều ở như nhiều xe chứ mua là thế chứ ya nhiều cứ nhiều tin nhá họ từ vậy là một tao một rồi cú mà hai mua hai cho cú ya mông ấy cú chỉ lại ngàn chứ lùa hai tiền cả cú lại ngàn ấy mà cho tờ ta thì chỉ cho bị lùa gì nó cú ít bộ bớt sinh nhà ta hàn cú lúc tết chơi cú lúc cú bớt sinh hoa hư cú bỏ nhà la trông là cú mua superior sống tu cú ya chủ tua sao ở chả nè hà lúc đấy đã trả một đề cú chỉ mua gì đâu cú lên đó thế cho nên lùa tàn để ya cái nhà ta hàn ít bộ bớt sinh để tiêu cú bao các bạn tahu rồi tua cổ tu dùng đi qua kinh đi qua tu chỉ đọc tiền là bây giờ trò bây giờ tao qua ta thì cú tiêu giờ đi chơi tao ở trò rong xe cú tu xuyên thọ chứ cú giờ chia là hai á tao con họ cho chân hành nó attaché đấy tu sai chùa cùng tháp bạc can này nhau hồ sa tàn thu đấy cú tiêu tao đó tao now I know cú bao họ từ một trò mày á nhiệt chiang của ngô xưa này thế giờ là lúa xưa này money thêm business anh già nó tu xuyên chia là hai lo luôn đó cho cúตัวโกตัวตรงนี้ก็ต้องจิตเอาตัวนะไปจิปูก็วันนะไปสากับมากังเก่งแล้วก็หมูอินหูอีโรกังหัวก็หมูอินหูอาโรหมูเย็นเตะซื้อยลอยแต่ทำหมดตัวเนี่ยจำอยู่ลุ้นตัว
because they did not see that the war could be won there. In this way, they came up against opposition from Vang Pao and others who wanted to win the war, who wanted heavy weapons, who wanted everything that they could get.
可是本到路电车上到木一路早起的，叫阿们干的进来的，木最寂寞了，找人我寂寞了，这头路见的这头我那这叫人到还中这，你那比这个到这个多，这对那也不一定能够是。
The Hmong were primarily trained in guerrilla warfare. Now they want the Hmong to fight a conventional warfare against the well-trained North Vietnamese army. You had about 20,000 men of the special guerrilla units and combined with military region 2, fighting against about 70 to 80,000 hardcore North Vietnamese army, not the Viet Cong, they're the Viet Minh. Bellaire proposed to Washington that there might be an issue because men is usually the one that protect and feed the family. And that's why the CIA decided to fund monetarily to pay the troops. Vang Pao never asked for money. He only asked for weapon. So as money became a factor, it also helped grow the special guerrilla units. Because now men can go in and fight and get paid, get pretty much a job, versus someone with no job and work out on the farm.
They bombed very heavily without having the desired effect. It was militarily unsuccessful. You could not stop the Ho Chi Minh Trail through bombs. It was like having the wrong tool for a job. It's like if you want to make a clean cut through a piece of wood, you would use a saw instead of a sledgehammer. It was simply the wrong tool. Nevertheless, it was a tool that the Air Force was very willing to use, and the Navy, to expand its mission. Since the North Vietnamese were violating the Geneva Accords, the Americans could too. So long as everybody kept quiet, everybody would violate the Geneva Accords.
At the 1962 Geneva Accord, it guarantees Laos neutrality for all foreign troops to withdraw from Laos. By this time, North Vietnam has about 40,000 troops in Laos. So the United States withdrew the CIA and the troops out. There were really no uniformed troops. They're just advisors to the Lao army. The Vietnamese, on the other hand, didn't withdraw any of their troops. They just put on civilian clothes because, like the Peru, that they could blend right in, the North Vietnamese could also just blend right in. So for the Westerners, they couldn't tell, but for those in Laos, particularly for Vang Pao and the Hmong, they knew who the Vietnamese are because they've been fighting the Vietnamese since the 1950s.
There was no question that North Vietnam could have sent in large numbers of its own forces and taken over Vientiane if they had wanted it enough. However, this was to cause them to hesitate and to make them aware that they would have to fight through the Hmong to do so.
Mong chỉ số bỏ tua cho nhà lại, mong sâu lúc tiền đầu sẽ gì cho nhà lại xa cái nói nhà lại chân chủ đầu mong cho cái mà, sâu lúc tiền cái sâu lúc mình chỉ bỏ chỉ có thứ kia, họ cho nên từ ship họ chứ cho nên chứ như thế cho tua ta.
Có nhỏ cho chị tê chị thủ nữ vô trò đời chị nhà la su tôi cho chị nhà la mới có của một trò sát tỏ nhà la lần chị có chị lý do tông đó lời một có nhớ trò sát tỏ này phong lời tỏ nó chị là su tôi cho chị trò vô tôi chị có tàu kia lo tỏ nó sẽ lý ý là một nhớ ý xa lời
chị tận đời lòng chân bê xa tiền chị trò nhớ đây chị trả lời chị tuổi bê lại chị trong đời cũng cho can trọng nè giờ phải đa hồ hải giáo tông chùa hồ tự tôi chị này hoa bỏ chị này hoa bỏ thì u li no tiền này hoa bỏ ít nước chỉ rong giờ nâng đa giờ rồi tê tu tê kỳ bọn tu chơi cho một trò này nó của tàu kêu ốp lăng gì tàu tê bỏ tê sấy nè chị nếu nó chị này hoa bỏ cô thì tàu mà ở bên nó chị này cô tê này tê thì nó đã lâu có nhóm đã có chỉ bọn tu có nhóm họ chùa xe có đàn chạy thông không ấy có chỉ là chỉ mua rau mà món này có tua tàu là chỉ bên nó bên chơi có tua bên nó bên chơi có tua bỏ nó mua rau mà món nào thế có tua bỏ nó bỏ liền có nhóm họ có chỉ đàn trong cổ họ chùa xe chỉ bọn tu đàn chạy lại hay nó chỉ bên của nó bên chơi xe y xe o chỉ xó lại lấy chỗ lộtตัวthứตัวchỗ tôi tăng chỗ tỷ xong cả phụ chỉ can tu xe ao về trường các mùa xì chỉ chỗ luôn đó bung tê chỗ nào cũng là tới cha lúc trẻ các chỉ tàu ta là rồi tan trò chỉ tuần đầu lúc chỉ nó chỗ bé nó chỉ tàu lúc chỉ bé chồng này sầu chỉ bé chỉ lịch khiêm chỗ bạc kế
này phong làm là bao cầm là bao hạt thì giống một nuôi dụ nhìn mà thầu dụ nhìn mà luôn trong phần số vạn thì sinh hoạt này rùa bê lu họ phê mà bê một chân khó đó nhà là lu họ phê thì phải đa là mà là linh chân có tao luôn trong sinh hoạt nữa thế
cho nhau sát thì cho thả thì là giờ thả mông họ bê cho hồ là thả mông thì tua chỉ sợ đến chia cho sợ bia leo vào thì họ bông đồng tiền lấy là phu liếp trong thì là yêu phu liếp trong thì nó lên nào thì tua lên nè tua từ đó chỉ nè giờ cú tụi tiêu nhau thì là quý tua liền họ cú tụi cứ nhau thì lấy tua lên nè thì tua không đâu chỉ mà là tua chỉ hay ra tua thôi lử chỉ tao là lấy xe tụ qua chỉ lấy tàu hai lục tàu thọ thế nè như hai lục gì thọ thế à thọ đó sao tua nữa bây giờ mông thế nè đi tua bây tuaนี่là tàu là cứ thế nè như vậy nó chỉ suy thằng đời chống lại chỉ hành ra thì có một họ thọ kế này một sự thọ kế tua kia cho áp cái tua thì tua kia lại là cho tất cả tua kia chỉ luôn kia là lợi lì là chỉ ôn hàng nho chỉ bay tua xứ ở tàu tua dạng còn.
The Lima sites originally were created so that they can supply. Because of the remoteness of northern Laos, people are scattered across the mountains. And when a village who are loyal to Vang Pao needed access, Vang Pao just told to build the airfield so the plane can go in, and they just did. Some of them were strategic. Most of them were just based on if they are loyal and if they will fight, then they'll be supplied so that they can be supplied weapons and food and all of that. There has been argument about keeping those people there so that they could get rice. It's hard to say exactly what the strategy of the U.S. government at the time.
Tụi nó nè, tụi vi này cái hải nè. Tụi vi này giờ tụi nó nè. Thái độ kia bên nhau bị long tranh. Cái sẽ được cái sẽ được bao làm việc tha hàn, yếu vật lý trả tiền, yếu cho tụi này yếu vật lý trả đồ trả. Cho nó này tha hàn lo thông bờ, cho nó yếm lo nữa. Chúng mình này phun tí lên yếm mông nhau nó. Cho nó này tha hàn lo này phun đại pan ta.
Cho nó tí tận là phong sức giờ.
Lo sẽ thế.
Chỉ này phun là tụi nhu nhon đại ở chiên gai nọ ở picnic park lock nó là mà nữa. Chỉ là chẳng tua nhu chỉ cái phải nhu ua nó chẳng chi thì giống thông tự chi. Chỉ tham bự làm cho bêm lòng phèn. Dân chia chỉ chọn xài làm một ít bơ chỉ chọn xài mầm lòng. Chọn xài của muôn thế. Chỉ cho cuốn chia ở chả tham bự so của mua. Mua tập phổ là so của mua. Của mua này super của ta bơ chỉ vào đi chả. Của bao giờ đi chả lên. Nên ta vang chủ. รัฐบาลอเมริกันเสียเพอันนั้นเรากูจะกูเจ๊งอีกกูแต่ no นี่เสียรงเกอนี่ตัวป้าเป็นจียก็จีเป้านะกูมาแค่ก็กูตัวเจียนนู่นนะนี่ตัวปักลักตัวปิกนี่ตัวยูนอกนงเพ่งที่กูย่อตีเปลุเตเชวันเสาร์วันอาทิตย์เปจมูต่อภาคมูนงเพ่งเทียมูนอมอต่อโหเดต่อตียาลิเน่จะจีเจนนี่มามังโกรล่อรู้ก็นี่จีชอบตอนนี้นี่ปุ๊บป้าจะถอดตัวเป็นยอดจิตเอาเป็นเลยมานี่โจจีล่อนะอย่าเป็นรัฐบาลไว้เนาะก็ช่วยให้หมดเนาะนะอย่ากูมันบ่นสปูเตโอไรเบอร์จีวริจาอย่าพุ่งยืกูตัดชี้ก้อนเลยอย่าเลยให้มึงเลยให้มึงเตะ
By the end of May, then Dr. Bontanwa came and he was waiting for all the nurses to show up. Then he would say, "I'm leaving. I will cross the Mekong." And he was heavily emotional. He was hugging, putting hand on your head and say, "I don't know I will see you anymore. But I will be in refugee camp and waiting for you."
Có những chỉ bao liều. Bây nhau luôn không mở xăm thong nó là nhà làng tôi nhau sầu trung nè. Cú hay giờ mình cả chừng nho nè. Vì ta phải thâu tôi này mò mồng xứ chừng nho nè. But tôi chọn gang luôn mà lại xứ nè. Everything is happened so quickly.
April 1975, Cambodia fell. 2 weeks later, big helicopter evacuation out of Saigon, and the U.S. pulled out, with Long Cheng being the central CIA base. The sky was falling now. Based on the peace accords that had been signed, both the Hmong and the Americans had hoped for a peaceful transition. But that was not the reality that was going to happen. Just as in Vietnam, there were the North Vietnamese troops that were surrounding the whole city. Coming closer and closer, within a couple of hours away from Long Cheng. Spies were coming into town, disrupting, watching. There were road watch teams that were put out on roads that had never had road watch teams because they were the friendly side, but there was no friendly side anymore. There was a large group of people, soldiers mostly, that gathered around his house for the last 2 days. He didn't dare leave. So many of the soldiers said, why is the general leaving and the high-ranking officers are leaving when we were the soldiers that fought in the war? People were angry that he didn't come out and say, this is what we will do, we will all go together, we will all stand together. There were people getting angry at each other, pointing guns at each other, saying, my family goes first, you stay here, you're nobody. I'm ranking officer, I go first. Anger, fear, and a lot of guns. So it was a very difficult situation. Jerry was the one who remained cool, calm, and collected, and it was his job to come up with a plan as to how to safely get the general out. If we count down the number of high-ranking officers and their families, how many do we think would be on that list? When the American planes came, chaos broke out at the airport. Now people knew this was an escape situation. It was no longer people following the lists. Now it was a free-for-all, and everybody was running for the planes.
Và có mấy tráp họ tuôn phim 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 phong trô chỉ bù luôn nhau hồng ya yếu cả thâu và có chế nên.
Many people who were at Longcheng at the time say that it was their feeling that the general kind of drug his feet on leaving because the more planes that came in to take out his top officers, their families, a lot of other soldiers, it gave them more time to escape. You go in with a 130 to land, but nobody has ever taken off out of there fully loaded. They were actually clearing those mountains barely. Part of the escape plan that Jerry and the general had put together was that they needed some kind of a diversion, some kind of a cover.
And the plan was for the C-130 to land. As the C-130 boosts its engine to take off, both the Jet Ranger and the Porter were to take off. And for Vang Pao's bodyguards to get onto the Porter beforehand. The Porter took off, circled around, looking down, observing the evacuation. The Jet Ranger went down the ramp, came low around the king's house, and landed behind the king's house. Vang Pao took his jeep and drove up to the king's house. They got onto the helicopter.
And so the C-130 was on the ground.
We've got a C-130 here on final. Landing lights just came on. This could be the last bird.
Everybody was focused on running to the back end of that C-130. Nobody else knew that once the general was gone, the air evacuation was going to end.
It took 1 hour and 20 minutes to make the trip. We're not sure that whether it's going to Lutheran or Nampon.
By chance, one of the American C-46s, the radios had gone out, and so he didn't hear the message that the general was gone, abort, abort, the evacuation is over. So he went in.
Okay, the aircraft is filled now, but the people won't leave the rear of it.
Many of the people said that they could barely breathe because of the pressure of the people that were standing all around them.
Matt has revved up the engines and pulled ahead a little bit, and the blast has sort of discouraged some of them. They're starting to move away a little bit.
They also said it was so noisy, so chaotic, with the engines and people talking, yelling to their family members that were still outside, trying to find their kids. But once that airplane took off, it was dead silence. He was the last plane, but he was so mobbed that the plane was only about half full when he took off and learned that that was it. The evacuation was over. 10,000 people standing on the runway, looking up at the sky, waiting for the next plane to come, and it never did.
Có sự trò lợ, có chủ cho có chân tu trò tờ, có sao trò chuyện do cho một trò gì. Nếu bọn nó bỏ cho thì cho tu trò chia tôi trong lợ, nếu mà do chạy, cũng chỉ là ít tu nọ, cũng chỉ khía chỉ tao. Có giờ mỗi giờ mỗi trò nhẹ cho bỏ chết tao, cái có khía có tua sư, có chỉ nhau ít tu nọ. Giờ cú mà cú khía, là cú chỉ ít tu nọ mong này, cú chỉ mà khía chỉ tao, mong tua là mong tua, mong nhỏ là mong nhỏ. Ít bỏ chia, sẽ luôn đủ bù bỏ, cho hiện đời nhau ta luôn từ nhau luôn đó.
Lo thì lo tới chỗ tù rồi, chỉ muốn trò rồi. Giờ có nhau cái gì cái đó ở trò, cái chỗ ở trò cái giờ dùng cho lo một số tệ sư cái bậc cả.
Very quickly, the seminar system develops, which is basically a re-education camp. The government starts with the officers first, working down through the ranks. And those that are the higher officers are sent off to very, very remote areas, some Nua Vieng Sai, and put into basically prison camp.
We were born into being Jaffa, trying to escape into Thailand. But I always thought that the Jaffa was, the common theme for me was that they were resistant. They were for the Hmong nationalism, Hmong identity, Hmong sovereignty, and they were there to fight so that Hmong people could exist.
For the Hmong resistance that continued to build at Pubia, there were two main leaders. One was Sai Shua Yang, and the other was Zhongjua He. But Sai Shua's group tended to work more closely with the former soldiers and the former officers that had removed themselves to the Pubia area. They counted on radios, they hid their guns, they tried to communicate with Thailand to find out, is there a plan? Is somebody coming to help us? Is there some way for us to get out of here? On the other hand, Zhongjua was more interested in more like an independent Hmong state. His group relied more on supernatural forces to protect themselves. When the Pathet Lao heard that, they thought it was very humorous, sky god or god from the sky. And so they started using the term Jaffa for everybody. The Pubia base is losing and people are making their way towards Thailand. The same thing is happening with Vang Kai Vu's group at Pumatau. They're all following these mountain tops.
Nên là dù bỏ dù cho nên tua thế chủ tôi dù cho nên tua thế sao lụt cho thế dù cho em bự tàu bự bự lụt cho cha tờ con đời tới sống còn cứ chỉ xa bỏ nên nè do nó tùy hàng lợi nó tùy hàng dùng.
Soon as each refugee group moved to a province, within 2-3 months, you will see this whole side of mountain or hill filled up with grave. You know, with little kids, a lot of kids that die more than the adult.
Is there help? Is anybody going to come? Some of the messages said, hang on a little longer and we will send help. But hang on, hold that territory. Other messages said, nobody is coming, nothing is coming. The U.S. is gone, General Vang Pao is now in the United States. Get out of there, come. Jerry Daniels is one of the people who's saying, come out, come out. Even though He was absolutely clear that the U.S. government was not coming back, was not going to re-engage. He still was a protector of a certain kind for the Hmong that were in the refugee camps.
Jerry basically went native. He spoke the local language, he lived with them, and he's like a brother to them.
He just developed a very, very close relationship. They could trust him and he trusted them.
He has worked with the Lao operation for so long that it was really hard for him to let it go.
American Embassy, Bangkok, Thailand, May 14, 1982. Asphyxiation due to inhalation of carbon monoxide according to...
Ultimately, there was a casket that was sent back that was sealed, that the U.S. government said this casket is never to be opened. And so for the Hmong, there was never any closure.
You know how he started his letters off, don't you, Animal Man?
No.
Well, you just dribbling shit. Where the are you now?
Bây giờ giờ xa mồ chỉ cho bây tôi nâng blo chỉ cho bây tôi bây dẫn blo lúc xưa nó chỉ nhỏ bây ao to xa trong chỉ chua là bây là tôi trong bây là tôi trong thì nhìn nào lúc này nhìn nào bây xa cả trong một cái gì là còn là giấy ra đá nên tôi bây giờ đời na
có trong đó rồi cô thì có chỉ phụ thì chỉ bung ở chẳng nó có vấn đề để tôi cho hay nên sản sinh đấy. I am not position. I don't know how to do.
The Hmong probably had the closest relationship with the U.S. government of any other, or more so than any other ethnic group, whether in Vietnam, in Cambodia, or in Laos. The Hmong now, as a group, are in difficult situations because of this. They're the only group that the Vietnamese have pretty well singled out for anti-Hmong operations.
It became clear very early that the officials in Laos regarded the Hmong as threats, and there is evidence of severe sustained attacks, artillery and troops, reports of chemicals of some sort, poison chemicals being used against the Hmong. Those refugees that I've spoken with describe having lived in fear of their lives and living in the jungle for months and years and making an arduous trek which lasts weeks or more to get to the Mekong River and cross to Thailand.
The secret war, engaging people from Mien, Khai Mu, Lua, and Hmong hill tribes, was designed to tie down as many North Vietnamese troops as possible, keeping them from moving along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to South Vietnam. Hmong casualties ran to the tens of thousands, 10 times those faced proportionately by American soldiers in Vietnam. There is a startling absence of men and boys of fighting age among the surviving Hmong population.
Hở lỡ chọn bê thế hở lỡ tì tôn cha của bùa bê sở đời là tôi lúc tế chờ nó lỡ muốn lỡ tì bó cha tuổi cho tôi bê là hết chứ nữa.
Bê rong xe ủa, ta xe mà bê sai tiền giờ cho lùa lỡ hai tôi bê tại lỡ lúc bê lỡ hai thế. Ta xe thời chạy lỡ thì mỗi bê cho chị lấy đếm lọc khoe, nó bê to là to chỉ tàu bê ăn đá là đá chỉ tàu. From
the very beginning, it was this partnership. We'll give you weapons, you fight for your own land, your own independence, your own freedom. And it's been that way all along. It was, hardware, software. And Hmong got eaten up.
Bây giờ Hmong họ tổ chủ là tôi nhớ rồi thì mình cả là tổ cái bản mình tổ cái cỡ chơi cần trên đầu.
Our desire, even from the days of China, has always been justice and liberty and the right to exist in this world. And because of these two, motivation and desire, their force of energy that drew them together, and their friendship was not through some sort of doctrine or agreement, but it was in the battlefield. That's tremendous courage, tremendous sacrifice and loyalty, not to the American necessary, but to the cause of freedom, liberty, and justice.
Yes, the CIA created this, but the personality, the stubbornness of Hmong, their drive for independence, their drive for freedom, is part of what tripped them up. They didn't just roll over like the lowland Lao.
There are some families who've suffered so much, who lost so many relatives trying to cross the Mekong River, that they will never recover from that grief. There are many other families who say to themselves, would I return to Laos now, even though I miss the old traditional culture? No way at all.
Even now, everything's still very fresh in your eye, in your mind, in your heart, that you're not gonna forget it. The whole family are broken. Husband left wife, wife and children left husband, son and daughter left parent left the kids. So we never connect.
Nên kia bé tệ đua nó chỉ đua ở tổ rong. Thế bé tệ tờ chỉ bé sa một chia ấy có trong một sa đèn này nó. Lần từ là những sa có tệ tờ rong lo. Chỉ sa có bia.
I don't remember how she looked like, but what happened to my mind, her image always had me. I always think about her, that what happened to her.
Tôi là tôi cháu học khơi tao là trai cho con trai của tôi. Con chơi với nhiều bố cha, cũng mua trái thì chắc cái thế trong tụi mình nhiều rong ra đó cũng nên nó chỉ tiêu cái này tiêu là bia cái này nhập qua theo. Nên nó chỉ cái bên một tổ tàn nhá là một tổ tàn thọ đủ. Mẹ là chỉ bao nhiêu nói chỉ là một cờ là nhiều nó mì lư chỉ là tôi một tổ tàn trong đó là nhiều tí gì.
Chỉ bảo tôi nên chia một nhau lên nữa này chỉ với tôi nên cô chỉ bảo tôi nữa qua đi cha là nữa là nhau là xưa na.
Chỉ mỗi trong nó chỉ nó, ta chỉ có một bự này chỉ mỗi cái cháu nó có tài điện trai rồi bỏ cái trái chỉ, nó để tiền bỏ nó có rau tí gì.
Back then is nothing. No psychology doctor, no psychiatric doctor, nobody evaluate people after the war.
Thế ở thế như vậy của thế hay của bạn này thì ở trong mình thế cho nên mình nghe nhau để cho mình thì
rồi mới cho nên chuyện chia nhau được nó nói chuyện thế sao một chuyện lỡ tờ tê là cho là tụi nhỏ là tất nhiên mà chia lên nữa là chia rồi là cho năng sửa.
Tất cả các bạn này chỉ tin này họ để bé sinh hoạt phụ chỉ bảo ta là chỉ tôi một số tôi là thế rồi lại bạn này bây giờ tôi bây giờ tôi lá thế tôi giờ là mà thế nào mà cũng chỉ chấp lời mà sẽ chấp lời thì ở đó cũng chỉ ta sẽ đi là cũng bảo ta bé sinh hoạt phụ là sẽ thế sao nhỉ nè.
Nhưng ở lần đầu chỉ ok chứ, cuối hai người thì có chỉ sắp qua cái sân chạy cái đó nhiều xe đi, có cho cả một chỗ cái cho tụi cái cho tha đó lọ. Thì có cho tụi cái tụi khăn mà mấy giờ nữa, có lúc có đó, cho tụi mình nhon thì có xài thì có bắt chỉ tao là, cuối hai người rong trong nữa thế. Chỉ nếu trong một nửa hai thì thôi nếu cho tụi mình nhon là ở phía nữa mà ta chỉ nếu có con nữa thế nào nữa hai đó.
I never saw her anymore after that, and I keep asking my dad what happened to her.
Cô nhớ cho nó nói chuyện nó từ đầu tao khỏi thì cha cô bỏ nhớ một đời cô bắt chỉ tao của tôi khen đi giờ đi chạy ước tiêu chuyện nhỏ nó theo cô cho nên tao cái tôi cái bao nhiêu lo thầu xin cho là cho tại sao nói chuyện chia chỉ giờ sao mong rong lại để tiếp lại sao giải cho chỉ xong cô ai để chia tiếp lại họ để chỉ để là cái chuyện bao để cao cho nhiều cái tôi cho chi đó cái tôi đó anh nhà nát ta hai chúng ta là cái chuyện là máu tu chân chỉ cụ thế, cái chuyện đó là cái chuyện quan trọng.
My mom had sent him the cassette that which recorded over and then sent it back to her. It was a very intimate communication between them, and the audio cassette, my father explained his aspiration and his desire, his determination and motivation to go back into Laos. To do the work of our father, General Vang Pao, and I didn't know about the audio cassette until I was in my 20s, and when I heard it, I remember crying. I just couldn't hold the tears back, and there was just so much emotion that was going through me, because for a long time I thought that somehow I had something to do with my father leaving. I wasn't good enough for something like that. And had I known that he was going to Laos, go and join the Jaffa or the resistance, I would have done everything I could to stop him. But as a kid, I was about 10, 11, maybe a little bit older than that. I just couldn't stop him. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. And for a long time, I just carried that guilt that I wasn't good enough like other kids, other sons. That's why my father went and chose to join the resistance.
Tại vì cú ba vả lão anh này nhớ đồ hôm đi tên mà nữ chỉ trong đi cao xa này con nhà nó cú cha kỹ lão anh này hôm đi tên mà giả tụ chỉ nhu chỉ tự chỉ xin đầu chỉ tàu nữa chỉ lại tên chỉ tàu nữa con nhà nó giờ tàu mà lại tên nữa rồi xin ra mà lấy cha là cú cha tháo cả các cái trong hải đâu cú cha mình nhiều ai cao lu ai cao mà đồ lên nó lấy chỉ lu cái là gì lên nó chín đấy ưa xin gì ưa xin lu ai cũng mà lu cả thầu từ giờ ưu sinh chỉ là do cũng chỉ cả của tôi mình chỉ cả chỉ này cho nên tu mà nữ giả lý lúc chỉ chơi và cho cá gì họ biết lúc khâu khóa thì nó cái này nó hay giờ thì cả làm chỉ của ai của tao cả ai cả một project đỡ bao thì của là chơi xong là cả đỡ bao thì của chơi xong cả làm chỉ của mà của sao hay tiền chơi cá gì kia chơi điện nó cho lần cho tu la tu yêu lần chơi yon chia cao mình chơi yo trong cái kia thì đợt này phun ba bỏ mình chơi nhiều lúc cái kia cú xa xứ tại vì cú xin chơi sẽ bắt tàu khăn nó ya cú chơi chỉ tàu khăn nó chỉ cú trả cả tua rõ này cho nên tu sĩ chỉ tàu lò bỏ đi trả này chẳng luôn này con nhá.
Many times I've been told no one has ever asked me my story. No one's ever asked what happened to me. And so there's this sense of confirmation that they've actually shared their story with someone. A good number of times when I've been interviewing the dad, the soldier, the children will come to sit on the floor around, very quietly sit on the floor and listen to this, and you can see him transforming as he finally becomes a full person in their eyes. They tell me, oh, my dad never told me that story before, but he says I've told them many times, they've never listened.
I thought that xã tơ xã gì xã mua nhiều một tia xã mua thì mua nan mua chi đó cơ nữa có mua là bố của nó cũng mua là bố của nó em mong thấy một cái gì luôn giờ xin dừng xe này yêu cha giờ xin dừng xe cái gì này nó muốn cho có xin giải chỉ tao kia mẹ tao kỹ tour ngồi tour mà ta tự ra thôi thì tour nó chỉ hậu rồi nhưng tour hậu chết cả khi lúc đi tàu anh biết tour thế gì nhưng tàu liền
dùng đi cụ tây tròn xa nó giặt tua là cụ dùng xiết tua là thì rồi nó trở chua cụ tung bao xua là
Production funding for the Hmong and the Secret War is provided by
Wells Fargo is proud to support this important documentary, The Hmong and the Secret War. As a first-generation Hmong American, I'm honored to represent a company that celebrates and embraces America's rich diversity. Wachau.
The Fresno County Superintendent of Schools is proud to be a longtime supporter of the quality educational programs found on Valley PBS. We continue to work together to honor and enhance understanding of the rich tapestry of cultures and communities found in our region.
Established in 1946, the Clovis Veterans Memorial District honors our Valley heroes, dedicated to the memory of all who proudly served, continue to serve, and protect the country. The district provides a permanent living memorial to the United States military and veterans.
additional production funding provided by and by viewers like you. Thank you.